So now that we've looked at Search Task Gang Common, let's take a look at one of its subclasses called OneShotSearchWithCountDownLatch. And as you might expect, this particular class will indirectly extend task ganging and will go ahead and make it possible to use a countdown latch as a barrier synchronizer. So what we're going to do first is just do a quick recap of what a countdown latch is, and then we'll show how we use countdown latch. So you can find this discussion taking place in the lecture slides that are part of the asynchronous videos of the course. But just to recap things, a countdown latch implements one of several Java barrier synchronizers. And these are the methods that it defines as well as the constructor. You can use a countdown latch to allow one or more thread objects to wait for the completion of a set of operations that are being performed in or by other thread objects. And there's kind of two different types of ways of using countdown latches. One is to use them as what's called an entry barrier. And a good example of a human known use of an entry barrier is one where you have the starting gate at a horse race where all the horses have to line up and you ensure that no horses go until all the horses are in position. So the race doesn't begin until the horses are ready to go. So that's the first way of looking at it, as an entry barrier. Another way to use a countdown latch is as an exit barrier. And an exit barrier can be used when you have one thread that wants to wait for a bunch of other threads to finish whatever they're doing before it can continue doing something else. So here's an example of a human known use of an exit barrier is something where a chaperone or a teacher on a field trip ensures that all the children have arrived and are ready to go before the bus departs. So you don't want to leave anybody behind. You can either do this when you're leaving on the trip. You have an exit barrier that says don't start the trip until everybody's there. And of course, when you're going back from the trip, you would do the same thing. You'd make sure that everybody was done with whatever they were doing. If it was a museum or a sporting event or a concert or whatnot, then the chaperone or teacher would wait till everybody had been accounted for before they could exit. So that's another way of thinking about this, an exit barrier. A countdown latch is well suited for fixed size. In other words, you have a fixed number of threads, one shot entry or exit barriers. In particular, you can't really use it for cyclic types of processing, which we'll look at later. And moreover, you really have to limit it to a fixed number of waiting threads. It doesn't really work well for variable numbers. So let's take a look at the one-shot search with countdown latch class. You'll see that this class uses the countdown latch in order to wait for all thread objects to finish concurrently searching the input for a list of words to find. So here's the way it's going to work. We've got this class called OneShotSearchWithCountDownLatch, and it is going to have an initiate hook that will initialize the exit barrier. Here you can see what we're doing is we're setting the barrier to a countdown latch with size, which is the number of threads or the number of elements that we're going to be doing processing on. The way this is going to work is each of the worker threads, which are the threads that are shown on the top, when they are finished processing, they're going to call the countdown method on the exit barrier. And that will decrease the count by 1. And when the count hits 0, then the main thread, which is the thread that's calling await, can continue. So the main thread is going to call the await task gang done method, which is part of the search task gang superclass, which it inherits it. And that's just going to call the exit barrier await method, waiting for the other threads to do the countdown. As we saw before, each thread runs the same logic in the background, doing process input, searching for words. So let's go ahead and take a look at the code for this particular implementation. So here we are back in the Barrier Task Gang project, and we're going to start by taking a look at the one-shot search with countdown latch class. As shown here, one-shot search with countdown latch extends the search task gang common superclass that we looked at earlier. You can see that it's got this constructor that just calls up to the superclass to give it the words to find and the strings to search. It's got this initiate hook method that's called back by the task gang framework. And the main thing it does, other than print out some debugging information, is it creates a new countdown latch of size, where size is the number of virtual threads and the number of list elements, because those go 1 to 1. And that will be used as the exit barrier. Then here's the hook method that's called whenever a worker thread is finished, and it just calls the countdown method on the exit barrier. That decrements the count by 1. And as we saw before, when that count hits 0, then the main thread that's waiting for this test to be finished will know that it's completed. This is a very, very simple example, just demonstrates how to use countdown latch. Nothing fancy or tricky here at all. So that wraps up our walkthrough of the one-shot search with countdown latch implementation. We'll now turn our attention to a couple of other implementations that have more interesting uses of Java barrier synchronizers.